Good day, everyone. Boniface here. Today, I am very pleased to present a recording of a conversation I recently had with Kathleen Carr of the Catholic Art Institute, and also with Mr. Rob Marco, a friend of mine, and the owner of the Paterfamilias blog, which many of you are familiar with. And we were having a conversation about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart, which is the challenges of being a Catholic creative, that is someone who makes a living in the creative arts, and that might be writing or the fine arts or the performing arts or anything of that nature. It was a really rich conversation between the three of us. This interview was originally recorded for the Catholic Art Institute YouTube channel. Kathleen Carr has graciously permitted me to cross-post it here on my own YouTube channel. And so I am presenting it here for you, and I will link to Kathleen's work and the Catholic Art Institute in the information section below. So that's my little spiel, and please enjoy the conversation. God bless you.
And welcome to our roundtable discussion on the blessings and crosses of Catholic creatives. My name is Rob Marco. I'm an author and the founder of the Paterfamilias blog. I write for Crisis Magazine, Catholic World Report, Catholic Stand, and various other Catholic publications. And I'm joined today, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And I'm joined by Kathleen Carr, the founder and president of the Catholic Art Institute, as well as Philip Campbell, author, speaker, history teacher, and founder of the Unam Sanctam Catholicam blog, which is marking its 17th season.
Woo!
In today's discussion, we hope to have some honest and frank dialogue about the joys and realities, responsibilities, and callings of Catholics in the arts and other creative enterprises, and have some fun in the process. So I just want to introduce Kathleen and Philip with just a short bio. Kathleen Carr is a contemporary realist painter. Her narrative paintings are a study of the human condition and explore themes of solitude, isolation, and interior life. Advancing on the works of the symbolists, narratives and are enhanced by pattern and translucent fabrics, lace, flora, and fauna, often serving as metaphors. Her work draws from many realist influences, both classical and modern, giving it a timeless yet contemporary uniqueness. Kathleen received her BFA from the Maryland Institute of College of Art. While pursuing her degree, she spent a semester in Florence, Italy at the Studio Arts Centers International. Her work has been recognized by the Portrait Society of America, the National Portrait Gallery UK, the Art Renewal Center Salon, the Salma Gandhi Club in New York City, the Butler Museum, the Sedona Art Prize, the Artist Magazine, Poet Artists, Circle Arts Foundation, and more. The artist technique was refined through postgraduate study in classical painting techniques with Robert Liberace and Scott Waddell of the Grand Central Atelier and others. Her training in classical painting began in late 2003 at the Shore School of Fine Arts. She subsequently studied with Robert Liberace at the Arts Students League of Virginia beginning in 2004 and continued for several years as her schedule would allow. She's also studied with Dan Thompson at Studio Incaminati. Prior to focusing on painting, Kathleen worked for many years as a graphic designer and illustrator for such companies as the Washington Post, National Geographic, Hirschhorn, Zuckerman Design Group, and others. Her design and illustration work has been recognized by Communication Arts, Adobe, Apple, QuickTime, Dynamic Graphics, and Step Inside Design Magazine. Kathleen served as program head of the Digital Media Design Department at the Corcoran College of Art and Design, where she also taught design and illustration courses in their undergraduate program. Her paintings have received numerous awards and have been exhibited in national and international exhibits, and her medium of choice is oil on wood panel. Philip Campbell was raised in Howell, Michigan. He attended the Howell Public Schools, graduating in 1998. He attended the College for Creative Studies in Detroit from 1999 to 2000 as an animation and illustration major, but did not return to complete a degree, deciding to pursue education instead. Following a conversion to Christianity in 1999, Philip entered the Catholic Church in 2002 and returned to school shortly afterwards, pursuing a BA in Liberal Arts from Ave Maria College, magna cum laude. Philip returned to school again at Madonna University, obtaining a certification in secondary education with a background in social studies, English classroom management, and educational psychology. Mr. Campbell began his work with young people as a youth director in the Diocese of Lansing, Michigan, and spent 10 years teaching history and sacred scripture for the St. Augustine Homeschool Enrichment Program in Ann Arbor, Michigan. In 2009, Mr. Campbell joined Homeschool Connections, a pioneer in online education for Catholic homeschoolers. In the decade he has taught at Homeschool Connections, Mr. Campbell has been privileged to share his love of history with thousands of students from all over the world. Mr. Campbell is a regular speaker at homeschool conferences around the country. He also holds a history boot camps for homeschool co-ops that give students an intensive, immersive experience in historical education. Philip has been writing since he was young. Since 2009, he has self-published a variety of books under the Croatian Hill label. Philip joined TAN Books, TAN Homeschool Projects in 2015 and helped launch the Story of Civilization series, a flagship project of TAN homeschoolers. To date, Philip has authored 5 volumes in the series. Philip has also written for Arcs Publishing, the Catholic Textbook Project, and Ave Maria Press. He continues to self-publish under the Croatian Hill Press imprint, which is also the imprint that has published my book as well. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining. I think this is going to be a fun discussion today, and I think we can just jump right in. So, as just to kick us off, what does your day-to-day look like as Catholic professionals in the arts and the creative enterprise? What does your day-to-day look like, and what are the biggest challenges, do you think, as a creative Catholic or creative artist that you face in your day-to-day work?
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay. The vast majority of my time, and then some, is really focused on the organization at present. Time is one of the most difficult things when it comes to every endeavor that has to do with creativity, especially, when it comes to my painting. It's very labor intensive, and it's a slow art. So, we have a difficulty in our culture these days with things that are just mass produced and then marked up. And it doesn't work that way when you're in more of the slow arts. And so oftentimes that time commitment doesn't translate itself into really being, recompensed in a way that you can support yourself solely on what it is that you're doing, unless, you have quite a wealthy patron. So I would say, in terms of challenges, mine is really both things. It's time and it's patronage. And I think that this is true of most people that are in the arts, is finding the time to do it and then finding the support. And everybody I know has a side hustle, because, I'm operating, whether it's in, creating sacred art, or if it's just the realist painting. There's a much smaller but very active part of the art world, and I'm friends with people that are quite accomplished in that world, and they all teach, or they do graphic design, or they have a side hustle. And so that's really hopefully that's the gives a little lay of the land. But I'm very busy trying to run this organization, which is also trying to shine a light on this and help support artists. So I'll give the floor over to you, Philip.
Yeah, I would agree that organization is absolutely key. I typically have 5 writing projects I'm doing at one time, and I keep a very regimented daily calendar that every day I can look at a calendar and I have time allotted for specific projects. I really treat my creative stuff, I think a lot of people who are in the intermediate stages of the arts, they really just want to go when they feel inspired. And if they don't feel inspired, they'll just kind of not do it. If you're making a living in it or trying to, you don't really have that luxury. So I have just a schedule, and it tells me what I'm writing on that day, and I write on it whether I feel like it or not. And one thing I've learned, a challenge, is to not go by my inspiration so much. There's that famous quote, who is it, by Edison, about that it's 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration, right? I've really found that my own assessment of how inspired I feel to work on something is not a good measure of how good I'm going to do, because in the beginning of my creative work, I would feel like if I wasn't feeling it on a certain day, I would be like, well, I can't work now because it's going to turn out crappy because I'm not feeling it. And then I would just force myself to slog through it. And it's not always fun. And then the stuff that I forced myself to slog through by sheer willpower, people would come back and say, that's some of your best writing, And I learned to not kind of trust my own feelings about it. And that was a big challenge. So I agree with everything Kathleen said about the organization, the hustle. Most of us have multiple irons in the fire that we're trying to cobble together something. But I don't know any person that has succeeded in the arts that doesn't have some sort of organization. It doesn't have to be the way I do it or the way Kathleen does it, but you have to have some sort of way to manage everything you're working on so that everything just doesn't become scattered.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I might be the exception here that I have a full-time job outside outside of the arts, and writing is my my outlet, my creative outlet, and things like that. So any financial recompense I get from it is usually goes to beer or to fuel the rest of the writing. But that's what impresses me about both of your situations is that the discipline and work ethic. If you don't have that, you're not. I would imagine you're not going to succeed. In any capacity in the arts. It's probably a lot of factors, but if you don't have a discipline and work ethic, that probably will take you a long way in building on natural talent, and then connections and patronage and everything else. So
yeah, and Kathleen brought up a great point when she said that there's not a strict like one-to-one recompense between where you can look and be like, oh, I'm making $20 an hour or what, it doesn't really line up exactly that way. It operates kind of on its own ecosystem of recompense and patronage, and you just kind of have to. I think if you don't have the right work ethic, then you're going to have trouble dealing with working that way.
Right. One thing that for our viewers that might not be familiar with Kathleen, Philip, or myself, or our backgrounds, most of our liturgical expression, and we're more, I attend the Latin Mass back home, and we're all Catholics. We're Orthodox in our beliefs and things, but I guess some people differentiate out between like a conservative Catholic and a traditionalist Catholic. And I know, Kathleen, you and I had talked about the traditional elements of traditional art, like that it goes beyond just conservative or liberal or progressive or whatever. But one question I did want to pose that I think comes up a lot is why do you feel that there are so few conservatives who take up the creative arts as a profession, or is that a stereotype? We know that they're out there, but in general, is there something that precludes people who have conservative proclivities or outlooks from either entering into the arts or being attracted to that as a profession in the first place?
Well, I think that if we look at what is happening in the arts, we can see that there is sort of a lack of a voice happening on the side of the right. The left is really using the arts powerfully and persuasively. I mean, almost to the point of it being propaganda sometimes, and I'm talking about film and, shows and, even with the art world itself, which is a different thing, because I'm in the realm of painting, they're using it very powerfully, and they're funded, and the right isn't, and the right doesn't fund it, So if it's not STEM, if it's not practical, if everybody hasn't been investing in it for the past 50 years, nobody's going to put any money toward it. And interestingly, Jordan Peterson talks about this. He brought this up a couple years ago, and I thought, wow, he really gets it, just how powerful the arts are, and that they really do need patronage and support, so we can just hope that by having discussions and really talking about this, that there's a real need, and in terms of the liturgy, well, I'm more attracted to things that are traditional. Of course, the Novus Ordo Mass, the new Mass, is valid, but let's be honest. I mean, generally where it's practiced, it's a real grab bag. And the exception is to find something that's very resplendent and traditional, and the church is beautiful and the rest of it. And more often than not, there's every sort of offense that could be happening, or there's just no interest in putting people in the right positions, such as hiring a quartet or musicians, to do some chant or polyphonic music, we have guitar strumming, we have a lot of volunteers, we have just sort of this low level of music, and these things are powerful, and they wonder why that people don't believe in the real presence. And without the external signs, which the arts are very powerful and the church always, invested in, I think that you're going to have a very depleted sense of the faith. How could people believe that Christ is being made present on the altar if a whole casual attitude prevails, if the church is very horizontal and everybody's looking at each other, everything's very man-centered, and just also with this casual attitude, copying music that's in the culture, that's secular in its creation, is not really as appropriate as the music that has come down through the church, and of which most Catholics are probably not familiar unless they started finding a more traditional mass. I mean, and that's there where I could see how I was just attracted to the beauty, and I know the power of it from being around St. John Cantius, from which this organization sprang. The conversion stories, because specifically of the beauty, opened a lot of these young people that I've worked with, coming from Art Institute of Chicago and various other places that have gotten involved with my organizations, opened them to the truth and goodness of the faith. And some of them were very much indoctrinated to hate the church and very liberal views, and it opened their mind. They wanted to explore maybe what the church actually was saying, and it was the beauty that did that. So sorry for the long-winded,
Kathleen, it's interesting that when you were talking about the physical plant of the church, when a lot of these historical churches where sometimes the traditional Latin mass is offered, these were built by recent immigrants and artisans, and laborers that they might have been masons or the stained glass. Everyone contributed to giving God everything in the best of the first fruits of everything of their talent and labor, to produce something magnificent and beautiful in the physical structure of the church. And I think there's a kind of a utilitarian mindset in a lot of the newer churches, which may be constrained by finances, but also just a lack of, like you said, sometimes the lack of faith. It's like a chicken or egg thing. Like there's a lack of faith pervasive in many of the churches today, come from the casual attitude or the architecture of the church itself that says we don't really want to give God our best. We'll give him what we have, what we have to work with. Or is it the other way? Is it that we're not building big, beautiful churches or magnificent pieces of art because of Catholic art because we don't really believe? Is it a lack of faith? So it's interesting.
It's both. Yeah. But I would say too, to build on what she said, like, why aren't there conservatives or traditional minded people in the arts? Is that a stereotype? Yes, they obviously are in the arts all over the place, but the issue is that I think the issue is one of the institution versus outside the institutions. Back in the 50s and 60s, the leftists made a concerted effort to take control of all the cultural institutions, the media, the universities, etc., and that applies to things like the institutions that buttress the arts, whether we're talking about the fine arts or the music industry, for example. So I would say that conservatives tend to not have a voice in the arts that enjoy institutional support. But that's not to say they're not in the arts. And I do think this is an important distinction because I play music a lot, and people will often say, "Oh, musicians are dominated by liberals," and I say, or actors, for example, they're all liberals, And it's like, okay, that's not technically true, because if you go into musicians, you go into a bar and that cover band playing the bar for $80 a night, they're not necessarily all liberals. The musicians playing at your county festival, at your fair, the guys playing at the Renaissance Festival playing Gaelic music. So when people talk about musicians are liberal, they're usually talking about a small elite at the top that have institutional support, right, of big music or whatever. And the same thing when people say actors are liberal. Yes, you're talking about a very small elite that enjoys the full support of the institutions. But are you talking about all the extras? Are you talking about all the cameramen? Are you talking about all the people that are doing drama at your community theater, right? So we have to remember that when we're talking about creatives, whether artists, actors, musicians, we shouldn't make reference to just the elites that dominate the cultural landscape. Those are obviously the ones that enjoy institutional support, and those are going to be dominated by liberals. But that's a very small piece of the pie. And there's a very large segment of the pie that are just what I will call normal people who aren't insane, right? Who, at the same time, though, aren't enjoying institutional support. They might be Catholics, like Kathleen or myself, or they might just be regular secular people who are, I'm going to say, are normal and they're not wacko activists, but they're also not enjoying the support of the institution. And this is a big problem. And if we're going to have some sort of renaissance of Catholic or even just traditional art in our society, either we need to seize control of the institutions, which probably isn't going to happen, or we need to have parallel institutions, that can give that kind of support, but outside those traditional organizations.
Well, Philip, since you mentioned about this, those in the secular world, and then when we spoke specifically on Catholic art or Christian heritage, in terms of the Christian identity of, in the creative arts, how does the Christian tradition, whether it's Catholic or Orthodox or evangelical Protestant, come into play in the art and creative enterprise, in your view? I know, Kathleen, you've had Jonathan Pajot on before, and he comes from the Orthodox tradition. Obviously, we have plenty of Catholic artists. I'm not sure in the evangelical or Protestant world if that's equally true. I just don't know. So maybe we can speak to how the flavors of Judeo-Christian backgrounds plays into the art that's produced, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I think when we look at the different denominations of Christianity, some of them are not really in support of the arts. They see it as graven images or other things like that, so they aren't producing it, and they're kind of hostile to it. The Orthodox tradition really sees the iconostasis, which is their sort of backdrop behind which the divine liturgy takes place. They're mirrors into heaven. So they're sort of, I guess what I'm getting to is the theology that is happening really affects what is created. And I have a great love of the tradition, of the East, the iconography. I think the West sometimes the pendulum can swing so far, especially once we have advanced beyond academic painting and into that movement where the camera came into play and things get overly realistic. This is where I start to have trouble. And so that sort of, there's an amazing technique that you can gain because I've been trained with it, but it's not always appropriate, for creating sacred art. There needs to be sort of an idealization that's taking place theologically, because the characters, the saints, the scenes are taking place in heaven. They're receiving the beatific vision. So this over sentimentality, over religion, emotionality. I mean, and so an idealization of form is a little more appropriate rather than photorealistically dressing up your sister in a costume of the Virgin Mary and then calling it, Our Lady of whatever, whatever your devotion is, or whatever instruments that you have, the model holding. What you end up having is a academically painted photorealistic portrait of your sister in a costume of the Virgin Mary, and it's pedestrianized something that should be sacred. And so I see this happening, just to your point, in some of the Protestant art. So the Mormons, for example, they actually do quite well in terms of training their artists to get to a very high level of accomplishment. It's just the end product tends to be what I just described. A little bit, for lack of a better word, it starts to look a little kitschy. It's not something where universality is there, because, we lose our particularity when we are in heaven. And so to have things that are so specific to a certain, race or down to a certain person, you start to lose that sense of a heaven, something that's in heaven. And it gets harder, I think, to pray in front of that when you have something that's so specific. It looks like, my sorority sister Muffy, it's supposed to be the Virgin Mary, sometimes with a very sugary expression. This is something that we really want to get away from. I mean, some of these paintings can be extremely well executed. It's just the theological tone behind it is lacking. So that's one thing that I notice in terms of the arts. And we could talk about church design, but I feel like I want to give the floor to Philip here, and then we can go back and talk about church design and that the issues with that.
Well, I guess everything that Kathleen says is true if we're talking about religious art specifically. I'm not sure if the question was about religious art or just Catholics doing art, but not necessarily religious art. Like, for example, I'm going to turn my camera here. On my table here, I'm working on an amateur pottery piece right there in terracotta. It's my first one. Don't judge it. There's no specifically Catholic way to make a terracotta vase, I don't look at this vase and say, what does this vase mean as a Catholic creative? It's just a vase. And so I think there's, it depends on whether we're doing religious art specifically, or whether you're just talking about how my identity as a Catholic bleeds into any art that I do. And obviously,
that was going to be the other question, Philip, that maybe you could ponytail off. It's just like,
well, yeah, I guess,
yeah.
Well, I guess I would say, all religious art, whether it's architecture or, iconography, whatever, it's going to be incarnational to some degree, or at least it should be. And I agree with what Kathleen said about you get into some forms where they're just abandoning traditional forms altogether, and it does come across as kitschy, and it doesn't have the Catholicity that is appropriate for the subject matter. But then when you're looking at like, okay, how does my faith affect things like if I'm just making a pot, or if I'm just playing, composing a piece of music that isn't necessarily religious, or writing a story that isn't necessarily religious. And I've always thought that as a Catholic, I feel profoundly connected to the idea that when we create, we're emulating God in the highest degree, because what is unique to God is that he's a creator. He brings things forth ex nihilo, right? And only God can create in that sense. But to use an idea, from Tolkien, men are sub-creators, where we can take existing things and create with it. And so even when I'm doing that terracotta vase, even if there's not a specific Catholic way to make a vase, I can imbue that with a Catholic sensibility of understanding that creativity is an approach to the divine, because it's emulating God, right? Whenever we create, whenever we paint, call forth music, make a vase, do anything. Whenever a primitive person picks up a stick and shapes it into a spear and makes a tool out of it, that is in a sense emulating God's own creative actions. And so they're all reflections of God's own divinity. And I guess I try to keep that in mind, and it gives a certain value and a richness to everything we do creatively that I don't know if I would enjoy if I was not religious. Like if I wasn't Catholic, I think I'd just be like, oh, sweet, I made a vase, like it's cool, I don't know that I would have the insight to see that this is a special way of approximating to my creator.
Well, even just, it's funny as you were talking, Philip, I was, just thinking, because I really like film. I really like, I've always loved watching movies, and I know Kathleen Barbara Nicolosi is on your board at the Catholic Art Institute, and I've always appreciated her work because she kind of sees, I know she wrote this article years ago about like the guerrilla filmmaking of the evangelical guilds that are just creating, like, as an example, like, the God's Not Dead movie, that was it was very overt messaging. There was nothing subtle about it. It had to be very evangelical ethos. But then you contrast that something with, the Passion of the Christ, which is overtly religious, but it also has this, just incredibly moving artistic, everything why that film was made. It wasn't just to make a quick dollar to capitalize on people's, overt religious sensibilities. There was something artistic about it, and profoundly moving. So I don't know enough about evangelical Christianity or Orthodox Christianity. I can only speak for the Catholic point of view, but I think the Passion of the Christ was like a example of that being done very well, of bringing, like Philip, what you were talking about the just your everything that you believe and everything that you do for the glory of God. I think really went into that film in particular, and that's why it was so moving, because it was an overtly religious topic and subject and everything, but there was something that moved beyond just the overt religious, hit you over the head with the messaging, kind of like Christian pop music today. It's just
Right. Well, that's the
nothing
difference
beautiful about it.
between like something that's, it's well, first of all, that was a masterpiece. It was very, theologically creative in his interpretations. It was filmed beautifully. It was it was a great piece of filmmaking. High craftsmanship in every way, married with the theology behind it, to give you something very powerful. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that Barbara talks about is just this, slamming it over your head. It's really not high. It's not well crafted, and to really get the craftsmanship up there, because we can have a lot of well-meaning people that do art and they have a good heart, but if they don't have the craftsmanship there, the skill level to be perfected, and also the creativity to tell a moving story. So this is especially true if you're doing a film that's biblically based, and we've seen this. The acting is poor, the budget is really low. You end up with something that's really silly, and it's not helping advance our side and our messaging, but then you have an echo chamber that happens around it interiorly within the church or those communities. And, if you dare say anything, you're the bad guy, but it's not well crafted, and that's what tends to happen. And so I know she's also talked about sort of this guerrilla marketing where, let's all go and sell the theaters out and we're really going to show Hollywood. And it just doesn't show Hollywood anything when we're trying to prop up mediocre art. I mean, and so there has to be a level of craftsmanship and creativity that is supported over mediocrity, and to stop encouraging this. And a lot of this too can be cultivated. But I see this, like, what I'm trying to say is there seems to be a different bar within the Catholic Church than you would have in the secular world. Okay. And they'll always say, oh, well, I was blackballed because of my faith. And that does happen, and that can be true. However, when I've operated in the representational art world, that's a much more welcoming community. They're trying to make things that are well crafted, and they do. And it's very competitive in that world, And so there thanks be to God, got some recognition and some awards. And so it's not that, so this is the kind of thing that needs to be happening within the church, is what I'm saying. There needs to be the same level where it's not everybody gets a pass because, I tried really hard, but I don't really have the skills. And you know what I mean? And this is what tends to happen. And this is why we get low craftsmanship, and also because there's not enough patronage for it. And so, with this organization, I've tried to raise the bar that, and artists too need to have some humility about themselves to get better training and to persevere. And not everybody gets a trophy. And that's a whole thing that happens in children's sports that drove me crazy. My daughter would come in last place in her league and everybody on the team would get a trophy. Why? You earn that trophy, you work hard and you get that trophy, and it means something to you. And, while we don't want anybody's feelings hurt, it's just that and nothing is going to change within a church with low art, with bad art, and I think we've already seen this, let's just call it Mary Jo. She sings through her nose, but she's got a really good heart, and Father lets her sing every Sunday at Mass, and it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. So he gets to save money in his budget, but he's driving everybody insane. And it's just really glorifying God at the end of the day, And so with what I'm trying to do with my organization is first and foremost, focus on the power of the arts around, to frame the Mass, and for evangelization, and what is that? We all have gifts. we give the best for the greater glory of God and for our fellow, brothers and sisters in Christ. And that's the purpose that I'm seeing in Catholic Art Institute. First and foremost, that's our focus there. So,
Kathleen, what do you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
oh, go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say she's absolutely right about there's a sense in which people want to get a pass just because they have the right message. And one thing I always tell young writers who they'll come to me with these great ideas for stories or whatever, and I'll tell them your idea doesn't matter. Like the idea is just a vehicle for communicating your writing. And if your writing isn't good, your idea isn't going to be communicated. And, we've all seen some really bad well, I don't know, maybe not, but when I was a kid, we used to take my home movie recorder out in the woods and we'd film like movies running around in the woods, like monster movies, right? And there's a lot of really bad B-grade horror movies that are just people running around in the woods, and they can be really poorly done. But it can also be really done very well. It can also be 1988 Predator, one of the greatest running around in the woods movies ever, right? Depending on the skill of that director and of the people involved and of the level of funding, So, and I think the art suffers, as Kathleen said, when it becomes too explicit. I mean, I think art ultimately is a right-brained thing. It deals with what is implicit, what is in the realm of insight and perception and intuition, right? You have to be able to tell a story, and there's a message that kind of transcends the individual dialogue and the plot points, and something bigger emerges. You say, this is meaningful. This means something. And you want to have that experience without a character having to give an exposition dump, being like, this is what this movie is about, blah, 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 hitting you over the head with it. And that's why great movies, great paintings, great music, like, why do you like a good song? Like when you hear a song that really touches you and you're like, this moves me, is it because the lyrics are just saying, this is a song about this theme that is important? No, it's something that kind of transcends all the individual parts, because the craftsmanship of the song is done so well that it speaks to you on an intuitive level beyond just kind of like the left brain rational side. And that's what the Catholic tradition does so well. And I'm going to add in the Orthodox tradition also. That's what any good icon is supposed to do. It's supposed to open you up to this world of symbol and intuition and mysticism that goes beyond what the physical, figures on the icon are. That's why they would say it's a window or a mirror, right? So I would just say that we need to focus more on the craftsmanship side of it. And absolutely right, there needs to be more patronage of this, because those people are only going to be doing that art in the church if the patronage is there. If not, why aren't we going to just do it in the secular world? And
Phil, it was just when you were mentioning about the patronage, like people invest time and money in the things that that mean something, that they care about. Like when you're first dating a girl, or you're engaged or whatever, and you're in that honeymoon period. Like I remember when I met my wife, I drove through a snowstorm just to like have coffee with her, because like for me, there was nothing that would stop me from going to see her in that moment. That's what I value. So I invest in that. So I think it does say something about almost a lack of faith, and a lack of almost an absence of faith and an absence of meaning in our world, that we're, people like yourself, Kathleen, in the Catholic Art Institute, and Philip, with your writing, we're trying to slowly overcome this lack of faith that has caused us not to take risks, not to invest time, money, faith energy, basically.
Yeah, but why would Catholics invest in it when the church itself, paints over murals in our historic churches, or destroys the art, or sends the messaging, this stuff isn't the priority? And then we wonder why there's not a high level of compared to, like, for example, Renaissance Italy, where there was a lot of patronage and it brought forth some of the greatest art in history, and now it's just the complete opposite.
Well, maybe this is a good segue.
Modern day liturgies are funding the National Endowment for the Arts and all this various other stuff, and then worse, how much of the faithful donated to the the Los Angeles Cathedral, Our Lady of the Angels. I think it was something like 200 million. And let's take a look. It's called the Taj Mahoney.
The Taj Mahoney.
It's alienating. It's problematic. I mean, and that gets back to,
they rejoice in the ugliness. They rejoice in the ugliness of it. Just
but
horrific.
How did this get in? And this is really what needs to be looked at is modernism. The modernism that has gotten into the church came, from the secular world. And particularly in architecture in the Bauhaus, but carried there by, Karl Marx and Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophic Society. And these are the people that were all meeting around the table. They were occultists, and they came back into Germany. And this is where you get the Bauhaus movement and all of this growing up around it. And it's a hostility. It's where we can all just be our own gods. There's a relativism that has taken over. It's an aesthetic relativism. I'm the purveyor. I get to say what is art and what isn't. And a break from the past, a hostility towards it. We don't want to do anything that's been traditionally done, that's ordered and beautiful. That's passé. That's been done. And we're breaking from that. We're starting all again, and we're doing things that are original. This is their word. But frankly, the word should be novel. It's a novelty. And the competition started happening between artists and architects to be novel. And there's a power to architecture too. There's a great sense of place. These various cities have a soul and a heart because of how beautiful their architecture is, and has grown up in particular ways in these various countries that they can all be proud of. And this has all gone by the wayside. The brutalist movement came in, and that was the communist, intentional desire to have this threatening and alienating architecture. These are the things that people don't understand. Like, where did this come from? And can you mix the two of them together? I don't see that you can. How can you take a movement that is so, at its root, hostile to beauty, which is an attribute of God, and then somehow try to mix it? And this is, at best, this is what I'll see happening. And a lot of times with Catholics, I was inspired by, Jeff Koons and then Giotto at the same time, and I'm mixing the two together. But
you get Father Rupnik.
Yeah, and you don't get a result that it's because the two are so diametrically opposed. And so this is what has given birth to a different way of thinking about the church building, and then what has just spawned, all kinds of varieties of indistinguishable from any other building, or it looks like a Pizza Hut or gymnasium, or you name it, in terms of church design. And no wonder the faithful are lost. Where's the tabernacle? Where's Christ? Where are the horizontal old church designs that had theological underpinnings behind them? They were designed through the Old Testament prescriptions of God. So you see, the front porch in the Old Testament prescriptions, and the main part of the church where the faithful were only allowed to go, and then the Holy of Holies, and that was where only the priests could go. And then, the tabernacle was separated. So we have a communion rail, or we should, because this is an indication that something, this is the heavenly part where heaven is touching earth in that sanctuary area, and then, the faithful that are being led to God at the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And so when you start changing that to a church in the round, which is very man-centered, and then the priest is, in the center, or everybody's looking at one another, the roof is low, you no longer have this sense that there's something heavenly where your eyes are drawn up, you're brought into a sort of a sense of reverence and scale that, because the church is a vision of heaven, and it's the Domus Dei, it's God's house too. So, there are theological reasons why it takes a certain shape, and the more traditional shapes are the ones that are communicating things theologically and moving people too. They, the older church designs will move you to a sense of reverence and awe and prayer. And isn't this what we want? And this is what has been lost. And so when you go into these new places, if you don't have that experience. And there was a shift in change in thinking, especially coming out of the Second Vatican Council, that, we want to be more, actively participating. And there was more of a, like, let's come together as a community. These are not bad things, but how this manifested itself in some of the externals in architecture, I don't think have been successful long term. I mean, why do we have, it's many reasons, but we have a real problem with, the faith is on the wane. There's, in my generation and younger, I'm Generation X, and the younger generations, we're losing people. And the study they did in terms of understanding that Christ is present in the Eucharist, it's a very low, understanding and for Catholics. So it's a problem. So
So it's pretty cool that we have 3 Gen X Catholics attend Latin Mass when they can. Is neat to have all in one room. But to scale it down a little bit, if I can, just like from the macro to the micro, in terms of the creative process and what artists and writers and musicians and stuff are working against today, in terms of the, when Kathleen, you were talking about the modernism of, after the council and the 60s and 70s that started to creep in. What about like the role of technology and how that's like robbed artists and writers, if it has, of the creative process? Like I remember, just speaking of Gen X, like growing up without any, cell phones, internet. You would walk in the woods, you would lay on your back and daydream for 2 hours looking at the sky. All that fuels the creative process, and now, there's no room for boredom. If you don't want to be bored, you can go through days and weeks and months without ever having been bored, because there's always something to grab your attention, whether it's a smartphone or computer or internet. How do you think that that's affected the creative process? And can you speak to, as professional artists and writers, what does your creative process look like when you try to come up with a new idea for a painting or a storyline or whatever? And how do you feel like you're working against what has been introduced to our culture in terms of technology and things like that? Or has it benefited you?
Do you want to go first, Philip? I feel like I've said plenty, but I'm happy.
Well, there was Apple just released an ad that they got a lot of blowback from, where they were showing off the new thinnest smartphone ever, and they had this ad. You guys seen this ad with the press? So they have like this big, like ugly industrial press that comes down, and in the press there's like paints and musical instruments and all sorts of symbols of human creativity, and the press just comes down and crushes them all. Ooh. And you see like the paint coming out of the press like blood, and then it goes back up, and what you see in place of it is it's pressed a smartphone. And what Apple was trying to say was like, what they were trying to say was like, this smartphone is capturing all these capability, but what it really, they were very tone deaf on it, and it really kind of, they said the quiet part out loud, which is this device is destroying the arts by removing the physical aspect of the arts that people find enjoyable, actually putting the trumpet in their hand, the human element, putting the musical instrument in their hand, working with the brush, etc. And they were ruthlessly lambasted for this ad, and rightfully so. And then Samsung came out with a rival ad that actually got the tone correct. They capitalized on this, and they showed like their apps, like teaching a girl how to read music, and she's sitting there like playing the trumpet, using the app to read the music, and that was better received. And it shows that what the real issue with the technology here is, like, any tool exists to reduce human labor, right? But we have to make it, because people will say, if you complain about AI, they'll be like, well, did you complain about cars when they put, horse and buggies out of business? Or do you complain that you can use the backhoe instead of having to shovel by hand? There's a difference, though, between toil and between art, because toil is like a kind of labor where the labor itself is kind of neutral, right? If I'm going out to dig a swimming pool, there's no intrinsic value in my, working with a shovel over 10 days to dig a big hole in my yard. You get a labor-saving device in like a backhoe that does it more quickly, and it makes your life easier. And it's like, oh, phew, I don't have to dig the hole. But art, the whole reason why art is because art is a kind of labor where the process does have a value that we find enriching, right? If I am making a painting, the act of making the painting is part of its value. I don't just say, how can I skip to the end and like, oh, good, I can get a machine to create the image and I don't have to paint. Oh, I can get an AI to make the music for me. That entirely negates the value of the art because we discover our humanity in that act of creativity, right? And so that's the difference between an artistic endeavor and between just toil. We can mass produce bowls. Like I have a bowl in my, I have a clay bowl in my cupboard that an artist made for me. A girl spun it on a pottery wheel. It has her initials on it. She glazed it. And then I have lots of bowls that I got at like IKEA, right? But guess what? Those are bowls. They have the same function, but they're not a work of art. Her bowl is a work of art because it has that human element in it. And so I'm certainly not a sort of person that thinks that the technology is always bad. I like technology. I like that I don't have to dig things by hand. I like that I have a zero-turn mower, you know? But
But those things are not creating your crops, and that's the difference between AI. I've seen this straw man or
exactly.
apples to apples argument to say, well, why weren't you upset about the electric typewriter? Well, because my creativity was still using that typewriter, whether I'm writing with cursive, which nobody can read anymore, by the way, or
Yes.
typing something out, it's all still coming through. And if it's coming through me in an effort to glorify God, then it's coming from heaven. And I'm that vehicle that is helping to create that with the help of our creator prayerfully. So that's a very important distinction. So I agree.
There's a difference between it like facilitating your creativity versus replacing it.
Right. Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's a good point because I'm not against technology either, and I'm not against absolutely everything that's come out of the modern art world per se, but with major qualifiers, because after a certain time, I understand that we're also dealing with a distrust of the arts because of what does get funded, and frankly, this sort of elitist bullying that happens in the art world that you're somehow a peon and unrefined if you are attracted to beauty and ordered architecture and various other things, and not getting it when it comes to this sort of chin stroking that happens, the great profoundness that you see in some of these things, and they're simply piles of trash. Or if anybody's seen Why Beauty Matters, the Roger Scruton documentary, he talks about this and walks through modern art galleries, and your average person doesn't, and they feel bullied and alienated, and rightly so, but then they feel that they have no voice. And I hear this all the time. I don't know anything about art, so I can't comment. Wrong. You do know something about art, and if it is a pile of trash, it is in fact a pile of trash. And I don't care, what national endowment or whatever is funding it and putting whatever nonsense around it. It is in fact still a pile of trash.
They've been gaslit into thinking they can't recognize art because they look at the trash and they're told that it's a profound thing, and they've been gaslit into thinking that they're too simple to comprehend its splendor.
And worse, that's exactly as you were talking about, the institutions have been taken over, and that's really where you're headed when you're in art college. So there's been a real loss of knowledge and skill building. Here's where I do like technology. And we're joined by my
this reminds me of that BBC thing that
yeah.
The lamps and the photo bomb.
Kathleen, when I was in the College for Creative Studies in Detroit for that 1 year, they had like a special gallery where they would put up their contemporary exhibits from the college. And I remember going in there one day, and they had, in the middle of the room, there was a pedestal, and it was like cordoned off with ropes. And on the pedestal, they had a McDonald's, like there was like a thing of fries and like a fish fillet in the styrofoam, and then the Coke, and somebody had just sprayed it over with like wax, to like preserve it. And it was just sitting there on the pedestal. And I walked in, and there's all these people standing, like you said, chin straight. They're all like, and this, and I was infuriated because I experienced what you said, where I'm like, am I supposed to be getting like this? Is kind of ridiculous, but why is it here? Why was this person probably paid good money to have this put here? Uh,
Well,
what am I
so
supposed to
often,
be getting out of it? It's
well,
just a
Kathleen,
McDonald's.
from your perspective, do you think that they're trying to compensate for a lack of training and objective criteria? Like when we talk about, like the goals of the Catholic Art Institute is, like obviously community, like artists need community. They work alone a lot of times, but we also need community. But they also need training. Like if you want to be a better writer or a better artist, like who is going to teach you? And so if you don't have that, like if you look at like Pablo Picasso's earlier works, like he was, his works were, Cubism was like the end of his his career as an artist, but he was trained as a fine artist, and he was, so like he had that, he knew to, you need the rules, just like any poets, like, poetry is, has lines and stanzas and rules that you need to live by before you could break the rules, so to speak. But do you think that, a lot of these, like the pile of trash in the middle of the art gallery is compensating for a lack of, like, people don't, they're not, they're not trained, and they don't know what good art is, like even the artists themselves, because they're
They would they would never concede to that or say that or think that at all. Absolutely not. It's all been done before, so this realism, this, that's just kitschy nonsense. And so anything that was made, beyond the 50s was really considered kitsch if it was realist in its depictions at all. And, you're simply a simpleton if that's what you aspire to. And, you're not allowing the artist to be creative. There was a major article written by a art critic named Clement Greenberg that talked about this, that basically anything representational, ordered and beautiful is kitsch. And this was really taken as a banner of the modernists, who at that point probably had suspect training or none at all, depending on how old they were. I had sort of a mixture when I went to college, but a lot of them weren't well trained, and you didn't know that there was any training. The other thing is this idea that's gotten into the art world of just this, genius. You're a genius. You just fall out of the sky with these genius ideas, and or that artistic ability is just, inborn. It was Michelangelo. He dropped out of the sky and, poof, he could just carve, the marble and everything the way he did without any training. And that's simply not true. And that doesn't, it's the same thing that you would see in any discipline of the arts, so in art college or in the arts, the plastic arts like painting and drawing, they'll just hand you your things and tell you to express yourself. And then, well, you're a genius or whatever. Would you do this to a musician? And would you want to hear the result of that? That's so. What has happened is that, the older style of training to really take somebody with an awful lot of natural ability. I had natural ability, and most of what, my peers did, but then you need to fine tune that and refine it. And you do this by learning from a master. I mean, and this would be the same thing if you're trying to become a better soccer player or a better ballerina. There are rigors to this. There's real work and labor if you're going to create something that's beautiful. I mean, and I think in that sense too, it's, fitting, we've got to make a bit of a sacrifice. Same thing if you're raising a child, you sacrifice, and at the end of it, you have, this beautiful, hopefully faithful, functioning, being that you love, and so it's the same thing, you're loving God through your sacrifice and trying to do something that is high crafted and well crafted. And I think this is kind of the problem in the thinking that's gotten into the institutions. And so there's a real pressure that's put on young students. And I saw this, because I went into art college and was like, I don't quite understand what all this modern art is. And at that time there was no internet, and, but they start to indoctrinate you, and it's the soonest that you can get off that exit ramp. I wanted to learn to draw like Michelangelo, and then if I wanted to cast that aside and be playful and do other things, then I would do that. But there's a lot of pressure put on you. And so I felt really robbed, because it was after college that I realized, Oh, there's actually classical training. And then I went and sought that out and got classically trained after I got a BFA. I got myself pretty far through natural ability, but I really, just even down to basic things. How do you set up a palette properly? And how do you, break down and make a finished realist painting? Nobody taught me that. That was
I
not.
think it was funny that the last semester, because I work at a university, I had the opportunity to take graduate classes for free. I've been writing all my life, but I never like learned to write like formally. Like I had like one English class, like a Com 101. I had one creative writing class in college, but so I figured I would take a graduate level English class, a nonfiction seminar taught by somebody with a PhD in literature or writing. And I got into the class, and it was just as you described. Like it was just like everybody's, there's no good and bad. There's no objective like standard to measure against, and it was so disheartening because I wanted to learn to write better because I never was trained. And it's related to what we were talking about the architecture and the masses and the churches. Like people who discover the Latin mass, whether it's by accident or intentionally seek it out. It's like you know, you hear it time and time again. And Philip, you probably heard the same thing. Like, I didn't even know this existed. I never knew this was never on the menu. Now, I became a Catholic in the 90s, late 90s. I think, Philip, you were probably around the same time. And, the new mass was the only thing on the menu, so to speak. So when you discover the traditional liturgy, the traditional, Ember days and all the stuff that was taken away from you, it was like we never even had the opportunity to learn about the traditional practices in the church. And I was just thinking how that related to the arts and to writing. Like even if you wanted to get trained, where would you go? And like I had to drop that class after the first because I was like, I want to learn to write well. I don't want to just dialogue with other people who are mediocre writers, and I don't know where to go to get trained. And so I think the Catholic Art Institute is really important in that sense because it's giving people the means who have more traditional and conservative sensibilities, maybe, but who also want to be masters of their craft. And so they're doing a really valuable work, but it's just, it's kind of discovering it because it's never been offered as an option before.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. When I first came to the church, I was just going to like the daily Novus Ordo using like Eucharistic prayer number 2. And I'd read my way into the church by reading like apologists who were writing in the 30s and the 40s, people like Chesterton and whatever. And I assumed that the mass they were writing about was the same one that I was going to. So I just thought that was the mass. And then gradually I started noticing some things didn't line up exactly. And then when I finally saw the traditional Latin mass, I was like furious that like I felt like I'd been robbed of a heritage, you know, and then finding out about all the other things that were taken away in the 60s and 70s. That's why it's so important to preserve these, not just the content of the art, like Kathleen said, the Mormons are, they can teach their people to, paint religious pictures or whatever, but it's about the forms too, the traditional methods that these concepts have been handed down are very important. I have a friend named Ethan Hayes. I'm going to plug his studio. He has a studio called E.A. Hayes Studio, and he has meticulously over a year. He's a former student of mine. He meticulously mastered the art of like painting old statues in the way that they were painted back in the early 20th century, the 1900s. Like the many of the statues that were destroyed, and even the statues that weren't destroyed, many of them have deteriorated over time. And Ethan spent the time to research what sort of paints they were using, back in the 1900s on these statues. How did they make them? And he restores them. And he has so much business. There's so many people that are coming to him looking for this. And there's a thirst for it. There's a real thirst for it. And people have this collective sense that they've been robbed of an artistic heritage. But I'm glad that it's making a comeback from people like Ethan and Kathleen and her organization. And so I hope that continues.
Amazing. Just because we're coming up on about an hour now, maybe we could just again, we've been taking a lot of like macro themes, but I do want to not neglect the the human elements, the individual elements of what it means to be an artist, and what it means to be, kind of what separates creative people, whether that's a musician or an artist or writer, what separates, what makes them different as an artist yourself or as a writer, however you choose to classify yourself. How do you think an artist tends to see the world and communicate that creative impetus to create beauty? What makes them different from, say, someone who doesn't have that, maybe who's more, I always forget left brain or right brain, Phil, which one is which, but you had made reference to it before, but you get what I'm saying.
That question is supposed to be narrowing it down from the macro level.
Well, take it down to the microcosm level, individual level.
Kathleen, what do you think?
Well, just in terms of being an artist and how God makes you, I think just one thing that comes to mind is the fact that, well, first of all, as an artist, you're looking around and automatically you're sort of able to envision things, what is this going to look like? I do it all the time. How can you transform a space and put some order to it and make it functional and beautiful and warm and all the rest of it. I mean, in terms of I'm just thinking domestically, transforming the garden, transforming other things. I mean, it's just the way you think. And there's just a creativity that tends to filter into everything that you do that's like that. So, I went to orientation. My daughter went to art college, and they said, most of the kids we know all cook. And that's true of me. But I was also good at photography. I can frame and compose things, that kind of stuff. Moreover, though, in terms of as how God has created an artist, well, we're up there because we create. We're not making things out of nothing as God does. We're making things out of things that God has given us and has already created. So a lot of emulating nature, transforming it though in terms of using our imaginations and we can bring inspirations down from heaven that God gives us. And so to a certain degree, I think it makes you closer to the spiritual in a sense. You're sensitive in certain ways that other people I don't think are all the time. Some people are just not that in tuned and sensitive, and I'm not saying this to be dramatic. It's just something that I found is true. And I think this is especially when there's a frustration that's happened to artists. Like, you're only here to express yourself and compete with other artists to be the most novel and original. Everything is drawn within, and it makes people crazy. And this is why you start seeing drug use and various other things. There's a disorder that starts taking place, and it's coming from the education system in that circumstance, where I'm trying to give hope. So we've talked about a lot of things, but I still try to be hopeful and this community, but to refocus on that I'm created with gifts, and gifts are to be given. So I'm giving them to God, and I'm giving them to my fellow brothers and sisters in the faith in whatever way possible, hopefully to draw them closer to God and to give something to God, with that sacrifice of time, and labor and focus. It's not easy when you're crafting something that's high craftsmanship. Completely different. I've made abstract paintings. I don't hate them, but completely different thing. And the challenge and the end result, and it's just nothing like the satisfaction and the toil and everything that it is to create something that is realistic, and then it's also nice when I can share that with people after I tell them I'm an artist, and they get that glazed over look on their face thinking, does she scribble for a living? Because they don't know. And, a lot of people like to call themselves artists. And I do this myself when people come up to me like, oh boy, what are they going to show me? It's like, but there can be something that's really like a higher, level of craftsmanship that, I think we should all strive for. And I'm not saying that I am, that I've mastered or cracked it. Not at all. I mean, I still have a lot more to learn, but, I try to take what I've learned already from this organization by, which I have, and then hopefully I can apply that to what I do, which I do look at as a gift for God and for others. It's just a different focus. So I don't know. What would you say, Philip?
Well, that's all good stuff. I don't know how to add to that really, but I would say in terms of how an artist sees the world, or what makes them different. I was thinking about photography. You both are probably aware with the famous Depression era photo, the migrant woman with child photo.
Hmm.
It's one of the more famous photos in modern history. And sometimes I look at a really good piece of photography, like something like that, or like an Ansel Adams nature shot, and I wonder like what makes this a work of art instead of me if I was just sitting there with my iPhone being like, there's a woman with a child, you know. Um, and I think a good photographer or any good artist, what they do is they show us that reality is more than what it seems. It is what it is, but there's more to it. You can look at a woman, a Great Depression era woman sitting there holding the child, and then the photographer has a certain eye for with the light and the angle and getting it just right, the craft side of it, to show us an emergent kind of reality that's deeper than what you see with your eyes. I'm thinking back to Thomas Aquinas and his distinction between, essence and existence, and that at the heart of every being, there is an act of esse, an act of existence, a dynamic reality bubbling from a creative act of God that holds everything in being. And an artist has the capability to kind of draw back the curtain a little bit and show us that reality is more, it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? And I think that is true across every form of creative endeavor, whether it's poetry, photography, music, whatever. It enables us to access reality on a level that is beyond just the empirical, right? And an artist is ultimately a communicator who's gifted in their particular medium at being able to do that. And it is a gift from God. It's a gift of being able to take a person and plug them into that reality. And that's why they're or they should be so valued in society. I don't know. That's my take. I don't know if it makes any sense, but
No, it
Right.
really does. Yeah.
And the arts, especially when applied to the mass, and this is the music down to all the instruments of the mass and the church building itself, and or the paintings, this is very powerful in commuting. We're making invisible realities into visible,
yes.
more tangible things to draw people into this. God gave us our senses and we learn through them. And so the one sense is not to be sort of ignored over another. So the preaching is important, but the arts are, all the more powerful and should be there. So, like the Corinthians, I think of that passage where there's many parts but one body, and the head shouldn't say to the hand, or the reading I'm talking about, where one is more important than the other, or that we don't, we if we're trying to evangelize and make people understand Christ as present in the Eucharist and honor him, we should be using the arts. So
Yes.
Yeah, and even just as an individual, writer in this case, but I've written poetry. I was grew up creating art. There is an element of feeling like there's lots of blessings here, but it's also kind of a cross that you're called to pick up for God's glory, for the good of the world. And it's because of all the work that goes into it, and when what you create is tied to who you are and comes from how God made you, and what he gives you. When it's not well received, or it's not as sometimes you can't be as objective or as detached, because you've poured yourself into this, whether it's a piece of writing or art or a song, and it gets trashed. There's something about the cross there that you're being crucified almost, not because people don't like you or what you've created, but that they're you know discounting your very essence or being that you've poured into this physical piece of thing as a gift for the world. And that can be really hard. I think that's for me, I struggle in writing that. What am I writing for? Am I writing for to create content that people can read, and then forget about 24 hours later? Or am I trying to glorify God and encourage my fellow Catholics and even non-believers into how to live a life for God, and but putting myself on the cross for their sake and for God, to do whatever it is I'm trying to communicate in that particular, book or article or whatever. And that can be really hard. So I think that's just what I wanted to touch on in terms of like the title of this conversation, of the blessing and crosses of being a Catholic creative.
You and I have had many conversations about this privately, and sometimes I don't know. I try to create without reference to worrying about what the audience is going to say, because there's always going to be. But sometimes, right before we went on the air, I don't remember if you were in the room or not yet, Kathleen, but I was talking about how I made I spent like weeks making a video essay that I scripted and found all the images and whatever, and then like all the comments were like people like complaining that I'd mispronounced some foreign words, that in a language that I didn't speak, and it was kind of like I did all this work, and all these people are just like, you mispronounced this word, and sometimes if you're in the wrong mood, it's just like, all right, well, fine, I just won't make any more then.
Yeah, it's hard, but I think also to remember all the blessings that it is, just like our faith, like it's comes with responsibility to do God's, God's will, God's work, and on earth, and then what we're called to do to prepare for heaven as well. But this has been a really great, a lot of fun, a lot of good conversation. I think we're coming up about an hour and 10 minutes. So any closing statements or things you want to leave with, or even plugs for your particular endeavors?
Yes, I have an upcoming retreat for artists in the Washington, D.C. area, June 21st and 22nd. We do have a hotel room block, and that's filling, and May 22nd is the last day to book on that. But we've kept the price as affordable as possible. We will have a beautiful mass in the ordinariate form with 4 choral singers and great presenters. Two priests that have a musical background. So it's going to be, 2 days to spend with Christ and fellow supportive artists, since, as we discussed, yes, Rob will be joining us. We need community. And so it's something to, that I wanted to do for artists, particularly since I worked in the arts my entire adult career, and you can find that there's, real hostility out there. So it's good to find like-minded Catholics that, we can share time with. Also, we have the conference that's coming up at Catholic University in September 27th and 28th. Really great lineup of speakers. And so look into that. All that's at catholicartinstitute.org/events. We also have the Sacred Art Prize competition for artists. We try to recognize there's really high craftsmanship and great work that's happening out there. And we're trying to help raise the profile of these artists. And it's been helpful. We're going into, our 4th or 5th year of this juried art exhibition. So it's helping them find work and commissions. And, some of them have gotten hired from various companies. So that's just a little bit about what I wanted to plug. And then just in general, like any support, if you're moved by this conversation and you want to see more traditional arts supported, we have a donation page. It's a real labor of love to run this, and it's not easy. So we rely on the support and generosity of people, and it's a reality. So anybody that would want to help out with that. So over to you, Philip.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, if you want to see more of the sort of writing that I do in my books or on the blog Unam Sanctam, which caters mainly to a traditional audience, but I think it's accessible to any Catholics. But then please support it, read it, share, especially, purchase books and leave reviews on them. If you want to see books still being written by human authors and not AI generated, then please purchase my books and leave reviews and tell your friends. They're quite accessible on Amazon, and you could find links to all my writings on my personal website, philipcampbell.net, as well. And so, yeah, just, so if you support what you value,
That's a great way to put it. So support what you value. Yep. Yeah. And if anybody, my writing is at fatherofthefamily.blogspot.com. It's over 900 posts there. My book, Wisdom and Folly, Essays on Faith, Life, and Everything in Between, is put out by the wildly popular Cruachan Hill Press.
Which Rob is habitually mispronouncing. It's Cruachan Hill Press.
Cruachan, thank you.
Yep.
I live in the written word, not the spoken word. That's why these are good chances to get together and
Philip, I think you should leave that as a comment on this video.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, I should put that after I just complain about people about
Right.
me mispronouncing things.
Yeah, I'll be on there to troll. I'll be on there to troll the video when you share this. So
Yeah.
feel like you know, I always get how backwards thinking that I am, or there's a lot of sour grapes, or whatever we're doing is not the right thing. And I put a lot of personal time and money in the first couple of years into this, and so I do this from my heart and at a lived experience, and what I know is really right and true. And AI is not creating sacred art. A machine can't do it. And sooner or later, how much is it just filtered down and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed? Where is any new creative endeavor going to come if this is the where everybody's going to be going with this?
Right.
There's already been articles, I've given interviews on this, so just to touch upon that. Anyway, thank you so much for having me on. Rob.
Thanks. This was a good convo, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Really enjoyed it. So.